All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of the sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becca Friedman, for dedicating all the Sherman Joshos this month in creation of the yard site of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda ben Rav Chaim Rafael, for an aliyah for the neshamas of all those who were murdered al Kiddush Hashem on Simchas Torah, and for a safe return of all of our soldiers and hostages in Gaza. To thank Sammy Malka Esterson for dedicating all the Sherman Joshos this month in memory of their parents, Hinda Bas Henach Ephraim, Yitzchak Leib ben Aaron HaKohen, and Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram. And to thank the Pepper family for dedicating all the Sherman Joshos this month in memory of our brother and uncle, Yosef Pepper, Yosef David ben Yaakov, Zichron Livracha, we hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas Lav and Aliyah, their families in Kamma, and all of those who need a refuah, Meretz Hashem should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And of course, as a shir, we dedicate Maseches Bava Kamma in memory of the Ilui Nishmas, Master Sergeant Yomi Charush, who died al Kiddush Hashem in Sderot. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family in Kamma. With that, let us begin. We have an incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Tes Vav 15, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Yudal Beis 14b, and we left off yesterday Bifnei Bezdin, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, so we're talking about over here, the Mishnah pointed out that Halacha L'Maisa, and this was the strange and ambiguous Mishnah that we read on the top of 14b of Yud Daled Amud Beis yesterday, and we're kind of going through it phrase by phrase in order to be able to fully understand what it is that the Mishnah is trying to convey. So the Mishnah said that the adjudication of damage cases can only be done bifnei Bezdin, in the presence of Bezdin. So the Gemara says, Prat l'mocher nechasav v'achar holich leBezdin. This comes to include the following case. We'll say, imagine for a moment, Ruvain damages Shimon, and then before they go to Bezdin, Ruvain sells off his property, right? So now Ruvain shows up to Bezdin. He doesn't have property. If he doesn't have the property, then Halacha L'Maisa, the Bezdin has nothing to adjudicate. So Gemara says, really? Is that true? Shmamina lava umachar nechasav v'achar kach bala Bezdin in Bezdin govin lo mehen. So let me get this straight. So let's say Ruvain borrows $10,000 from Shimon, right? That means his property is encumbered. Imagine for a moment that before coming to Bezdin for repayment, so Ruvain sells off all of his property. So now Bezdin doesn't have any recourse because Ruvain sold off all of his property. That's not true. In other words, once a person has a responsibility for damages done, ultimately, again, there's an encumbrance. Once there's an encumbrance, that devolves upon everything, even upon property that is subsequently sold. Gemara says, you're right. So rather, again, what does it mean? Ela bifnei Bezdin or bifnei Bezdin? Ela prat leBezdin hedyotos. So Rabbi said, this is actually very interesting. Rather, the Mishnah is coming to teach us, we'll say as follows. That Halacha L'Maisa, in order to go ahead and collect damages, only a Bezdin with smicha has the ability to collect damages. Look at Rashi for just a moment. 3 lines up from the bottom in Rashi. Ella, lahachi asam hasnisin, the Bezdin mumchin, done in Dine Knossos, fellow Bezdin Hedyotos. I will say, this is kind of entering a little bit into a subsequent sugya that we're going to have. Right? In a number of these monetary cases, some of the things we're dealing with are mammon, and some of them are knas. Right? Some of them, again, are monetary payments, some of them are penalty payments. Now, interestingly enough, what we're going to see is as follows. In order for a Bezdin to collect on a knas, it has to be a Bezdin that has smicha. Smicha represents an unbroken chain, right? We'll call it ordination. Rebbe to Talmud, Rebbe to Talmud, Rebbe to Talmud, already beginning with Moshe Rabbeinu and continuing all the way through. In Eretz Yisrael, they had a tradition of smicha. In Bavel, they did not. Now, it happens to be, for most things in halacha, you don't need quote-unquote, as I will say today, the smicha that we have, right, when we call smicha, it's kind of like a zecher to what was. Okay, so a person studying for smicha takes a number of tests on a number of bodies of knowledge, learns under a rebbe, but it's not the classic smicha that we had again, that Masorah from directly from Moshe Rabbeinu. In Eretz Yisrael, they had this smicha. In Bavel, they did not, which means that in Eretz Yisrael, they were able to adjudicate knas cases. In Bavel, they could not. We'll talk about that. So therefore, again, the Gemara is suggesting over here that when the Mishnah says Bifnei Bezdin means that knas cases can only be adjudicated in front of a Bezdin where the Dayanim have proper smicha. Incredible. Al pi edim, right? Based on witnesses. What does this come? Prat lemode beknas v'achar kach bo edim shu pater. So we'll say this is fascinating. So therefore, again, normally, how do you establish liability? So we'll say liability can be established in two ways. Number one, either through personal admission, or number two, through testimony. So the Gemara says something very interesting, that this comes to exclude a case of, let's say, a person is mod b'knas. We'll say, let's say a person goes in and admits they owe a penalty payment. So generally, what's the halacha? Mod b'knas, pater. If you admit that you owe a penalty payment, generally, again, you exempt yourself from liability. Now, what happens in the following case? Imagine for a moment, Reuven admits that he owns a penalty payment. So what's a good example of a penalty payment? I steal a sheep, and I go ahead and I slaughter it and I sell it. So what does the Torah say? I'm liable now to four times payment. 4 times payment, that's a penalty. That's a patch. That's a penalty. So let's say now I steal the sheep, I slaughter it, I sell it, I come to Bezdin, I admit it. So it's going to be the halacha. I am exempt on the penalty. I have to pay the principal, but I'm exempt on the penalty. Let's say right after I show up in Bezdin and admit that I did what I did, what happens? Who rolls in? Witnesses. Witnesses roll in. So what's the halacha in that case? So the Gemara says, Prat lemode b'knas v'achar kach bo edim shu pater. The Mishnah is going to teach about say that halacha l'maisa, the concept of once you admit to knas your pater applies even if witnesses subsequently come in. Now, just to be clear, if witnesses come first, right, and say that I stole and slaughtered and sold the sheep, and then it's, oh yeah, you know what? They just shot, I did do that. It's been a busy day. I forgot about that particular episode. Now I admit it, that I do it. Obviously, that doesn't work, right? But in the case, ultimately, again, where I admit first and then witnesses come afterwards, the Mishnah is teaching me I am still pater because my admission came first, even though witnesses come afterwards. So Gemara says, 1 second, this is machlokes. So that works fine according to the opinion that says that if you admit a knas and subsequently edim come, that you are pater. Elman da'amar mode b'knas v'achar kach bo edim chayiv ma'ikal mimar. But I will say, but according to the opinion that says that when you admit a knas and afterwards witnesses come, that the arrival of the witnesses establishes liability, so ma'ikal meimar. So then what is the Mishnah coming to teach me? To which the Gemara says, you're right, seifa itzrichle. The truth is, I need a seifa. What does the seifa coming to teach? It was at top of Tesvav, 15a. The Seif at the end of the Mishnah is going to teach you an important halacha. B'nei chorin u'b'nei bris. So let's remember again, the end of the Mishnah said that what does this apply to? Whatever we're not sure what it, remember again, it's an ambiguous Mishnah, but the Mishnah said b'nei chorin, free people, and b'nei bris, members of the covenant. So according to this approach, so watch this. See, here's what I have before we explain this. I have the Mishnah says al pi edim. Al pi edim. So now the Gemara is saying, what does it mean when we say al pi edim? Al pi edim means that ultimately, again, generally liability for damage is established through the testimony of witnesses. Okay, now the first thing the Gemara says is, well, the Mishnah is also teaching me, the Mishnah is coming to exclude the following case, that if I am responsible for a knas payment and I admit liability, even if witnesses subsequently show up, I'm still exempt. The Gemara says, 1 second. What about the opinion that says that when you admit liability and witnesses come, then now you're obligated? According to that, what does the Mishnah come to exclude? See, interestingly enough, the Mishnah comes to the exclusion of the Mishnah is learned out from the next two cases, B'nei Chorin, or the next two statements, B'nei Chorin and B'nei Bris. Both say those are coming to teach you the kind of people, ultimately again, who are fit to be witnesses. Who is allowed to be witnesses? B'nei Chorin, free people, and B'nei Bris, fellow Jews. L'me'utei avadim. So B'nei Chorin, l'me'utei avadim. So B'nei Chorin comes to exclude avadim. That avadim, an eved, can't be a witness who obligates me in damages or knas. b'nei bris, Jews, lemi'ute ovdei kochavim. Ultimately, it comes to exclude non-Jews that they cannot serve as witnesses to obligate me in monetary damages or knas payments. Interesting. Good. So we'll say now the obvious question is, why do you need both? Right? In other words, obviously, if an eved is excluded, right, an akum is excluded, and the eved is excluded, why would you need exclusionary statements for both? I'll tell you. The Gemara says, Utzricha. Say, I need both of them. Why? Di'ashmein, I'll say, third line from the top on 15a. Di'ashmein, an eved, if the Mishnah would have just excluded eved and told me that an eved is not fit to serve as a witness in either a knas or damage case, Mishum de'in lo yachas. Well, I say because an eved doesn't have any genealogy, right? There's no yuchsin by an eved. Aval nachri diyesh lo yachas. Rabbi said, but interestingly enough, remember again, a nachri, a non-Jew, has yichus, right? There is a familial genealogy there. So I would have thought, imalo, I would have thought perhaps he's not excluded, and perhaps a non-Jew can serve as a witness in a case of damages or penalty payments. V'yashvin a nachri, and if it would have just taught me that a nachri is excluded, why? Mishum delo shayach b'mitzvos. Since a nachri, we'll say, since a non-Jew, ultimately again is not shayach, he's not in the parsha of mitzvos. Therefore, again, he cannot serve as a witness in a financial case, mammon case, or a knas case. Aval eved the shayach b'mitzvos imolo. But remember again, we'll say an eved who is shayach b'mitzvos. We'll say, remember again, an eved kanani is shayach, does have an obligation in certain mitzvos. Again, an eved kanani, we'll say, we know his interesting status. He's kind of like quasi-Jewish. He's quasi-Jewish. So I would have thought, therefore, again, perhaps he is permitted to go ahead and serve as a witness in this type of case. Therefore, tzricha. Therefore, we'll say I need the exclusion of both. Therefore, it turns out that this one phrase of Al Pi Eidim is telling me three things. Number one, the Pasha Pshat that it's telling me is that liability for damages is established through witnesses, or damages or knas. Again, obviously I could admit, but otherwise it's established through witnesses. What is the Mishnah coming to exclude? So both say, so there's two different opinions. One opinion says the Mishnah is coming to exclude the following case, that if I admit that I owe a knas, even if witnesses subsequently show up, I'm still pater. The second opinion says, no, if you admit a knas and witnesses subsequently show up, now what? Now you're chayiv. So what is it coming to exclude? It's coming to exclude, ultimately, again, an eved and an akum, that they can't be witnesses in any type of monetary cases. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's go back there. Now this is interesting. V'hanoshim b'chlal hanezek. Women are included in the parsha of damages. Okay, which means, sounds like women are subject to the same laws of damages as men. So the Gemara says, how do you know that women have the same halachos of damages as men do? How do you know this? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, v'chein tana d'Rei Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Kras. So we're going to see now, we have a couple of different opinions. Pasuk says, Ish o Isha kiyasu ma'al. Kiyasu malcha, so we'll say, so the kiyasu malcha, kiyasu mikol chatas adam limo ma'al ba'ashem v'yashma nefashahi. So we'll say, so you see over here, so the Torah itself links ultimately again a man and a woman. If a man or a woman, ultimately kiyasu mikol chatos. So you see over here that if a man or a woman commit any transgression. This happens to be, again, regarding liability, custodial liability, right? But you see over here that a man and woman are linked in terms of liability. Therefore, just as a man is liable for damages, so too a woman is liable for damages. Hishva kosav ish isha l'chol onshin shabatorah. The Torah goes ahead and links a man and a woman for all punishments, for all liability in the Torah. Okay, that's first opinion. The Rabbi Shmuel Tana. So also in the Rabbi Shmuel they said, Ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. These are the laws. These are the laws, mishpatim, that you shall place before them. Both said, who's them? Who's them? Men and women. So hishva hakos of ish li isha l'chol dinin shabatara. So both say, so I just want to point out something very interesting. Pasuk number 1 is talking about onshin, liability. So from here you see the Torah equates men and women regarding liability, regarding punishment. Pasuk number 2 is talking about mishpatim, laws. And the Torah says these are the laws you shall place before them. Who's the them? The them is everyone. So here the Torah equates men and women for dinin, for halachos, right? For again, I will say, and obviously mishpatim, by the way, is monetary law, right? So here, men and women are both obligated in the same aspects of monetary law. Third opinion, the Bechizke Rabbi Yossi Litana. So the Bechizke Rabbi Yossi they say, Amakra vehemis ish o isha. So we'll say the pasuk over here. Now this is actually talking about a shar, an ox that killed someone. So the Torah says that the ox killed a man or a woman. So the Torah says, so the Gemara says, Hishva hakosav isha leish lecho misos sheba Torah. So we'll say, see from here that the Gemara is saying that men and women are equal in terms of death. In other words, that there's liability for killing a man or killing a woman. That was it. Someone understands if there's liability ultimately again for killing a man or killing, what does that show you? That men and women are the same in the laws of damages. Okay, so therefore I will say three different sources to get. So I will say here's what's again one of these interesting machloksim where no one is disagreeing about the conclusion. Right, the conclusion is men and women are the same in the realm of liability. The machlokes is where do you learn this out from? The Gemara says, I need all three of these. Why? Because at the end of the day, if it would have just had the first proof, the Rav Yehuda Marav, the one Isha Kiyasu Mikol Chatos, so the Gemara says, Hasamu Dechas Rachmana Allah, Kihechi the Tehavi La Kapara. See, I will say, interestingly enough, the first pasuk that talks about liability also speaks about how to atone for liability. So I would have thought that again, since that first pasuk talks about kapara, atonement, both men and women require atonement. That's why ultimately again a woman is involved. Aval dinin, but maybe by mishpatim, ish debar masa umatan in ishalo. A man who's generally involved in business dealings, perhaps he should be subject to the laws of mishpatim, but maybe a woman not. Okay, dinin, and if it would have just said the halachos regarding mishpatim, that men and women are equal to mishpatim, here's what's interesting. Halacha l'maisa, if a woman were not subject to the laws of mishpatim, to monetary law, then what I was saying, no one would ever want to do business with a woman. Right? Why not? It would be ridiculous to do business with someone who's not bound by the same rules that you're bound by. So therefore, again, it has to be that a woman is bound by the laws of mishpatim. Otherwise, she's not going to be able to, so to speak, make a living. Otherwise, no one's going to want to really financially interact with her for fear that she could just totally exploit the situation. Aval kapara, when it comes to atonement, ish bar mitzvah in, isha delav bas mitzvah lo. Maybe a man ultimately again is subject to mitzvahs. He's ultimately again in the parasha of kapara, but isha maybe not. Maybe isha not. So interestingly enough, if you take a look, Rashi says ish bar mitzvos mishalim bala shar kofra liyarshim mishun de batle mi mitzvahs. So ultimately again, he's talking about over here. He's ultimately again saying over here that Allah l'maisa, maybe only a man needs the kapara, but a man who is a bar mitzvah ultimately again requires the kapara, but an isha not. Now this is actually talking about a situation over here where let's say a man was killed. Maybe in that case there's kofar, because again a man lost out on mitzvahs, but maybe by isha not. Hani tarti, and if we just said the first two cases, hachemishum kapara, vachemishum chiyusa, aval inyan katla. Ish debar mitzvah l'shalim kofer. Sorry, I skipped that in Rashi. Ish debar mitzvah l'shalim kofer. Ishalo. But I will say halacha l'maisa. Remember again the third pasuk, which was the Beichizkin of Yosef Elili, that was talking about if a person's shar kills a man or a woman, maybe halacha l'maisa. So what's the halacha? You have to pay kofer. Okay, we'll talk about this more in depth. You have to pay a kofar payment, an atonement payment for the death that your shar caused. So I would have thought that maybe, who gets a kofar payment? Maybe only a man. In other words, for the death of a man, you pay the inheritors of the man a kofar payment. Why? Because a man has mitzvos, and killing him ultimately, again, makes him lose out on the mitzvos. A woman who doesn't have the same obligation to mitzvos, maybe her inheritors don't get kofar. Kamash malam, no. Right? Kamash malam, the Torah says to say everybody gets a kofar. V'yashmin kofar, mishum de'ika ibod neshama. And maybe only the obligation is to pay men and women kofar. Why? Because there's loss of life. However, aval hani tarti deleka ibod neshama emalo. But but the previous two, where ultimately there's not a loss of life, maybe women are not included. Therefore, tzricha. So bottom line is that each of the cases mentioned are unique in their own way. Now, I will say the truth is this is part of a general overarching principle, which is the only exception to women's obligation is ultimately, again, when? In mitzvos aseh shazman grama, time-bound mitzvos, which we saw in Maseches Kiddushin. But in general, in everything else, namely, again, prohibitions, averos, liability, right? Ultimately, again, men and women are going to be the same. It's just interesting. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah says, "V'anoshim bichlal nezek," to teaching that when it comes to the laws of damages, women are the same as men. Same liability, same responsibility, both if they are the damager, as well as if they are the damaged party. So again, just three different sources for this particular halacha. Quite interesting. Samar goes weiter. Well, they said, now we come to a great sugya. Get ready for this. Hanizak v'amazik b'tashlumin. So say, now this is an interesting phrase over here. So literally translated, it means hanizak, the damaged party, v'hamazik, and the damager are both involved in payment. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Now, interestingly enough, Rashi points out there, "B'tashlumin mashma d'shnein mafsidi mama b'tashlumin shezem b'shali mechza v'zem mafsid mechza." So, now watch this. Rashi understands from the beginning that this phrase, where do you ever have a case where both the damager and the damaged party are both involved in payment? Where do you ever have a case like that? Chatzi nezek. Where do you have Chatzi Nezek? When is Chatzi Nezek paid? Half damages? Tam, by where? Karen. Right? Remember, Rabbi said there's only one case besides Swaros, which we only mentioned, we haven't gotten into yet. Remember, Rabbi say the unique part of every other type of damage, Shane, Regel, Bar, Aish, right? Every other category of damage is Muad Mitchilaso. Muad Mitchilaso. The only case, right? The only case we have this distinction between a tam, right, and a muad is in keren, which is again damage caused through aggressive behavior of the animal. And the unique halacha of keren tam, or meshuna keren, as we saw in yesterday's daf, right? Keren tam is you pay chatzi nezek. Now, I'll say what's interesting about chatzi nezek? Chatzi nezek is everyone loses. Right? Why does everyone lose? Right? So the damager still has to pay 50%, and the damaged party gets 50%, but also potentially loses 50%. So the Gemara says, so Rashi understands over here, Hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin. There is a case in halacha, there's a case of damages where both ultimately the damaged party and the damager are both involved in payment. That's the case of Chatzi Nezek by Keren Tam. The damager pays something, quote unquote loses something. The damaged party receives something but also loses something. So we'll say, so now get ready for this. Get ready for this. Itmar, get ready. Get ready. Itmar, Palganiska. So I will say, let's talk a little bit about Chatzi Nezek. Right? Chatzi Nezek, half damages for Keren Tam. Rav Papa Amar Mamona. Rav Papa says it's Mamon. It's, excuse me. Rav Papa says it's Mamon. Rav Huna Yeshua Amar Knasa. Ooh. So we'll say, watch this. What is Chatzi Nezek? What is Chatzi Nezek? Is Chatzi Nezek Mamon or is Chatzi Nezek Knas? Is it a monetary payment or is it a penalty payment? And I will say, by the way, right off the bat, you know what's the big nafkamina in this? What's the big nafkamina? Mod the B'Knas Potter. In other words, I will say, if my shar guards Reuven shar, no one saw it, right? No one saw it. I walk into Beis Din and I say it was me, right? I say it was me. I will say, because obviously, you remember, the concept of Mod the B'Knas Potter only works if no one knows that you did it. Right? In other words, if Reuven and I are standing together and my ox scores Reuven and I say, you know what? I own it. Shkoyach. Right? You own it. Of course you own it. We're right all right here. We all see it. Mod v'knas means no one else knows that I did it, but I come and I admit it, then I'm potter. So we'll say, so again, if you hold that Chatzi Nezek ultimately is a knas, that means if you admit liability, you're exempt, right? Mamon, even if you admit liability, you're still going to be liable. So we'll say, so fundamental machlokes. So let's analyze. Here we go. Rav Papa Amar Mamona. So Papa says that Chatzi Nezek is Mamon. He says, listen to this. Kasavar Stam Shvarim Lav Becheskas Shimor Kaimen. But see, in reality, you can't really guard a shar. Can't really guard a shar, right? Stam Shvarim, in other words, Stam Shar, we'll say, is not properly guarded. Not that we're saying that the owner is not guarding it. It's that, we'll say, it's really impossible to fully guard your ox against doing damage. Right, it really is. Right, so Stam Shvarim La Bechezka Shimor Kaimen. They're not really. Rashi says over here, Rashi, just a moment. I'm sorry. La Bechezka Shimor Kaimi Sheregilin Benegicha Utzvichin Shmira. In other words, we'll say it is common for an ox to gore. This is interesting. So we're going to see about this. This is actually in machlokes in animal psychology or animal behavior, right? So let's listen to this. So Rapapa says it is normal for an ox to gore, okay, and therefore ubedinu. But say in reality, Papa says you should have to pay full damages even the first time your ox scores. Why? Because it's normal. That's what animals do. Animals damage. That's right. That's what they do. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, it's common, and therefore, really, you should have to pay full damages even the first time. So the Gemara says, why do you only have to pay? Why do you only have to pay? But the Torah, so to speak, gives a break to the owner of the ox. Says, listen, we understand you tried, right? You're trying to the best of your ability to guard your ox, to keep it, right? To keep everyone safe from your ox. And therefore, again, the Torah relaxes liability in the first three times. So therefore, again, I was saying, so this is Rapapa's logic. Rapapa's logic is, in reality, it is common for an ox to damage. That's the default. Oxen do damage. As long as you try your best to guard your ox from doing damage, the Torah will go ahead and takes it easy on you for first-time offenders and only makes you pay half damages. But it's mammon. Why is it mammon? So why does Rapapa call half damages mammon? Because in reality, how much should you be paying? The whole amount. Torah just gives you a little bit of a break the first couple of times as long as you're trying to do your part. No, knasa. He holds that's a knas. Why? Kasavar stam shvarim becheskas shimor kaimi. Rav Huna says no. In reality, we assume that an owner can absolutely go ahead and guard his ox. And it's not normal for an ox to engage in aggressive behavior. And therefore, again, in reality, as long as you're doing a good job guarding your ox, it is abnormal for an ox to go ahead and engage in such aggressive behavior. And therefore, in reality, you, the owner, should be totally exempt. Right? Why? Because you're doing your part to guard the ox. It's not normal for an ox to engage in such aggressive behavior. So in reality, you should be exempt. However, the Torah gives you a patch. The Torah penalizes you. Why? The Torah goes ahead and penalizes you in order to get you to even do a better job of watching your ox. So I will say, so this is the fundamental machlokis over here, and interestingly enough, what the machlokis boils down to is normal animal behavior, right? Rav Papa holds that it's normal animal behavior for an animal to gore. Rav Huna Bar Yeshua says it's not normal animal behavior for an animal to gore. So therefore, Rav Papa will say it's normal, and therefore, Allah you should have to pay everything. Torah relaxed your responsibility, your liability, only made you pay half. But that half, that's called mammon. Rav Huna Bar Yeshua says it's not normal for an animal to gore, and in reality, you shouldn't be chayv for anything, but the Torah penalizes you with half damages to get you to be on your game to watch your animal. Incredible. So we'll say this is a fundamental machlokes. Let's analyze. So Tanan hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin. So we'll say, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that both the damaged party and the damager contribute towards tashlumin, payment. They both say tashlumin means a monetary payment. So So according to the opinion that says chatzi nezek is mamon, which is Rapapa. So ultimately, again, so hainu d'shayich nizak b'tashlumin. So we'll say, so that's why again it makes sense to say that the damaged party also has a part in the damages. But according to the opinion that says chatzi nezek is a knas, not mamon. Hashta delav didei shakel b'tashlumin isei. So we'll say at the end of the day, Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi's b'tashlumin. You say, so I'm sorry. The shaykh nizeh b'tashlumin. Kolomar mafsid mimash shayarayilo to buy lishkal kulei. Supposed to listen to this. But if it's knas, so the nizak wasn't really entitled to anything. If the nizak isn't entitled to anything, so what exactly is it that he's taking? To which the Gemara says, lo nitzricha ella lepachas nevela. No. What the Mishnah means, Rabosai, is we had this a couple of days ago when the Mishnah says that even the nizak, the damaged party, shares in payment. What is it referring to? Depreciation of the carcass. Well, if remember again, we established a few days ago that what? That Allah Chalamaisa, who is responsible to go out and take care of the carcass? The damaged party, the nizak. Not only that, but remember again, the value of the carcass is locked in as of when? As of the moment that it is killed. We evaluate it, we appraise it, and it's locked in. And therefore, any subsequent depreciation is borne by the damaged party. So according to the opinion that says that chatzi nezek is knas, when we say that, which means that in reality, the damager shouldn't have to pay anything. So what does it mean that the damaged party is included in the payment? What it means is the damaged party bears cost also. How? In carcass depreciation. So the Gemara says, Pachas nevela hatana lereisha. But we already learned about carcass depreciation in the previously. Tashlumei nezek. So also when we said before, Tashlumei nezek, Malamed, Shabayla Matabel, but that was the first wide line. We already learned that ultimately, again, the owners are involved in taking care of the carcass. In other words, the owners, being the nizak, are involved in taking care of the carcass. To which the Gemara says, you're right, chad b'tam v'chad b'muad. One case is talking to me, telling me that the nizak is responsible for the carcass, right, and bears any subsequent depreciation in the case of tam. And one teaches me that same halacha in the case of muad. And why in both of these cases? Utzricha tiashmoyin tam mishum dakati lo yayit. So in the case of tam, I would have thought that's where the nizak is obligated to deal with the carcass and also bears any of the depreciation. Why? Because ultimately the animal is not yet a muad. So because the animal is not a muad, therefore the owner of the animal has no responsibility. Aval muad imalo. But maybe in the case of muad, Rabbi say, where now again the ox is a habitual offender, maybe the owner of the ox, the mazik, should be the one that has to deal with the carcass and should be the one who has to deal with depreciation. Therefore again, the imalo v'yashmoin muad mishum dekam shalim kule. Furthermore, again, in the case of muad, I would have said, why does the nizak deal with the carcass and therefore any subsequent depreciation? Because anyway, he's getting full damages. Aval tam emalo, but maybe in the case of tam, ultimately again, since he's only getting partial damages, perhaps the mazik should have to deal with carcass depreciation. Therefore tzricha. So I will say. So bottom line, by the way, is actually very important. It's very important that halacha l'maisa, the concept that the nizak, the damaged party, is responsible to deal with the carcass, to dispose of the carcass, to recapture any money from the carcass, and bears the loss of carcass depreciation, applies in all cases. It applies in a case and it applies in a muad. So that's just a side point. Bottom line is, what are we still focused on? Our fundamental machlokes, Rav Papa and Rav Huna. Is chatzi nezek knas or is it mamon? So Rav Papa is saying it's mamon, Rav Huna is saying it's knas. Let's go back to Tashma. Ma bein tam lemuad. We'll say, what's the distinction between a tam and a muad? Here we go. Shatam mishalim chatzi nezek migufo. A tam pays half damages from the value of the actual damaging animal. Umuad mishalim nezek shalim min ha'aliyah. And muad ultimately pays complete damages. I will say, from what? Min aliyah. What does min aliyah mean? Min aliyah means from the best property. It's back to our first Mishnah in Bava Kamma. Vim isa. Now, if it's true that chatzi nezek is a knas, then you should say vim isa. Vim isa lisni nami hatam enu mashalim al piatzmo. Muad mashalim al piatzmo. So I will say, you should say there's another distinction between tam and muad. What's the other distinction? Muad. You could make yourself liable, right? If you go ahead and admit that your ox damaged someone else, then what? You chayiv. But by tam, if you admit that your ox damaged someone else, right, and it's chatzi nezek, modeh b'knas is pater. From the fact that that is not included in the distinctions of knas and muad, seems to indicate that's what? That chatzi nezek is mamon, it's not knas. Interesting. The Gemara says, no, it's not a good raya, ton of a shear. We'll say it's not meant to be an all-exhaustive list, right? The Tana left off certain, in other words, we'll say, the Tana is giving us a list of differences between tam and muad. Ultimately, again, the list is not meant to be exhaustive. That's not what it's meant to be, right? It's a partial list. It's a partial list. So the Gemara says, okay, my shir the high shir. So it says, ultimately, again, right, what was left off? What was left? I don't know what to say in general, when you leave off something from a list, you can't just say that one thing was left off, right? It's got to be like a couple things were left off. So the Gemara says, my shir the high shir. So shir chatzi kofer. Okay, so I'll say, interestingly enough, what's left off? Half kofer. Now, both say, what's chatzi kofer? Take a look at Rashi. Chatzi kofer, muad shehemis es ha'adam mishalim kofer liyarshim v'tam afilu chatzi kofer l'mashalim. So, what's the interesting distinction should be as follows. So we know that if an ox kills someone, ultimately they have to pay a kofer, an atonement payment. The owner has to pay an atonement payment. So, both say, so is there such a thing as chatzi kofer? Chatzi kofer, a first-time offender, but the first-time offender kills someone. Is there such a thing as chatzi kofer? To which the Gemara says, we leave off from over here the case of chatzi kofer. Imishum chatzi kofer, lav shiurhu. But say chatzi kofer, that's not a good answer. Why? Hamani, whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Yossi Galili, damer tam mishalim chatzi kofer. Rabbi Yossi Galili holds also that even a tam pays chatzi kofer. So chatzi kofer you pay if you're a tam, chatzi kofer you pay ultimately, if you're a muad you pay full kofer. So tashma, so what's that analyzed? I'm a base, hemis shori es ploni. So now watch this. We're still trying to figure out the same machlokes. Is chatzi nezek mamon or is it knas? So watch this. Hemis shori es ploni. My ox killed so and so. Oh shoro ploni. Right. So I admit my ox killed Ruvain. Or Hemis my ox killed Ruvain. Or my ox killed Ruvain's shar. What's the halacha? Harezim mishalim al piatzmo. I could what's the lashon? Incriminate? Yeah, self-incriminate. Good. I can make myself liable. Right? I can make myself liable. Right? I can make myself liable. So what's the halacha? So my lav bitam. Aren't you talking about a tam? And therefore, you're going to say it's what? It's a case of chatzi nezek. And you can see that you can self-incriminate, right, with chatzi nezek. You can self-incriminate with chatzi nezek. So what does that show you? That chatzi nezek is what? Mamon. Because if it was knas, then what? Moda b'knas is pater. So there seems to be a good raya, seems to be a good proof that chatzi nezek is in fact mamon. To which the Gemara says, lo, b'muad. It's not about a case of tam. It's talking about a case of muad. I also remember again, everyone agrees that what? Damages by muad are what? Are mamon. About tam mai. So we'll say, but what would be the halacha by tam? Hachanami de'ein mishalim al piatzmo. We'll say if it was tam and you showed up in Beis and said, listen, my shar injured Ruvain's shar, then halacha l'maisai be pater. Why? Because chatzi nezek is a knas, and ultimately again, mod b'knas pater. To which the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, ihachi. Aditani Seifa, look at the end, right? What does the Seifa say? Hemis shori es avdo ploni, right? My ox killed Ruvain's eved. What's the halacha? Ein mishalig al pi atzmo. Ultimately, again, I do not pay based on my own admission. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Liflog v'lisnei b'didei. So don't even bring up the case of eved. Why not go ahead and illustrate this principle? Because also remember again, here's what's interesting. When an ox kills an eved, there is a fixed payment of 30 silver pieces. So as I say, that's a knas. In general, any time, right? How can you sniff out a knas over Moana? How do you know? Knas is what? Fixed. Anything that's a fixed payment that has nothing to do with the actual damage that was done is usually indicative of a knas. There are certain there may be an exception, as we'll see in just a little bit. I'll say, but bottom line, right? So the end of the Mishnah says that if my ox kills Ruvain's eved and I show up in Beis and I say I did it, what's the halacha? I'm pater. Why? Because again, the penalty is a penalty payment for killing an eved. That's a knas, and therefore moed b'knas is pater. So we'll say, instead of going ahead and bringing down the eved case, just splice the reisha, and you can illustrate that same idea as well. How so? So we'll say, when is it that halacha l'maisa, if I show up in Beis and admit liability that I'm chayiv to pay, that's b'muad. That's in the case of a muad, right? So if I show up in Beis and I say my muad shar killed someone or killed someone else's shar, I am obligated to pay. Why? Why? Because halacha l'maisa, that's mamon. Aval b'tam, but in the case of tam, eno mashalim al pi asmo. In the case of tam, ultimately, again, you do not pay based on your own admission. Why not? Why not? Because ultimately, again, that's knas, and moda b'knas is pater. So we'll say, so why not go ahead and illustrate the distinction between mammon and knas? That way, you don't even have to bring up the case of Eved, to which the Gemara says, here's the problem, kula b'muad kamari. The Mishnah itself, I will say, is only referring to a case of muad. That's the case of the Mishnah. We're talking dafka about muad. So the Gemara goes back to the Gemara says, Tashma, zakla, this is the rule. So I'll say, so now again, so remember, we are still in the midst of this fundamental machlokes about what is the nature of chatzi nezek. Is it mamon or is it knas? We're still trying to resolve this. So watch this. So tashma, zakla, this is the rule. I will say, any time that you pay more than what you're obligated to pay, you don't pay based on your own admission. Which is another way of saying what? Anytime you pay more than the actual amount of damage you've performed, we'll say, what is that? What is that? Knas. So because that's knas, if you admit it, right, you don't pay it. Right? So you wouldn't pay based on your own admission, i.e. moda b'knas pater. Now what do you see from here? Now it's interesting, the formulation interesting is here. My love, ha-pachos mashezik mishalim. Then I will say the way the Brisa frames this is, anytime you pay more than what you're liable for, you don't pay based on your own admission. Which makes it sound like what? But what happens if you pay less than what you're liable for? I.e., chatzi nezek. It sounds like you would pay based on your own admission, which would seem to indicate to us what? That chatzi nezek is mamon. To which the Gemara says, no. Lo hakim mashezik mishalim. Ava pachos mai hakanami de lo mishalim. That was what it means to say is like this. When you pay what you damage, that's called mamon. And that's when you could go ahead and pay based on your own admission. But if you're paying either more than what you damaged or less than what you damaged, that's called what? That's called what? That's called knas, and you won't pay based on your own admission. Ihachi, if that's the case, the Gemara says, Adetani zaklal, called Hamashalim Yeser al Mashezik Ena Mashalim al Pi Asmo. If that's the case, then instead of saying anytime you pay more than what you're obligated, than what the damage is, you don't pay based on your own admission, listen, Zakla, say this is the principle. Kol She'eno Mashalim Ki Mashezik. Just say, anytime you don't pay the amount of damages, right? Which means anytime you're not paying exactly what you damaged, ultimately, we'll say, then what? That's knas. That's knas. Demashma pachos umashma yoser. You can infer from that. I will say that includes the case of whether you're paying more than what you damaged or less than what you damaged. It's not going to be liability. And that would tell me, Twitch Gemara says tiyufta. You're right. You're right. I would say that's a good kasha. In other words, the formulation is strange. The fact that the Brisa says any time that you pay more than what you damaged, that's a knas, seems to indicate to us that if you're paying less than what you damaged, that's still called mamon, which would seem to indicate that chatzi nezek is mamon and not knas. So therefore, again, Rabbi say we refute that proof. Ve'ilchasa, Rabbi say what's the halacha? Palga niska knasa. Rabbi say the halacha is chatzi nezek is a knas. Chatzi nezek is a knas. So Rabbi say, so ultimately again, chatzi nezek is a knas. So the Gemara says, tiyufta v'hilchasa. Rabbi say, so how does that make sense? How does that make sense? Ultimately, again, I will say, you refuted the halacha, and now ultimately, again, the halacha is that way. I will say, we just quoted the Brisa, right? And we refuted the Brisa. The Brisa doesn't seem to indicate that chatzi nezek is knas. Right after you refute the Brisa, then you say the halacha is chatzi nezek is knas. How does that make sense? To which the Gemara says, in taima mai havit tiyufta. Ultimately, I will say, why is it a refutation? Mishum delo katani shkimo shezek. Because I will say, ultimately, again, because the Brisa should have read that ultimately, again, when is it mamon? It's mamon when you're obligated to pay in accordance with what you damaged. To which the Gemara says, lo psikale, kevan deika chatzi nezek tzroros. I will say, I'll tell you why you couldn't say it. Because there is an outlier case. What's the outlier case? Half damages of tzroros. So we'll say, we've mentioned tzroros in a couple of different situations. couple of different situations where we'll say we're halacha l'mais like this. What's chatzin nezek of tzros? We're going to see chatzin nezek of tzros is where the animal goes ahead. The animal goes ahead and kicks up pebbles and damages as a result of what it kicks up. So we're going to see you pay half damages for tzroros. That's halacha l'moshe misinai. That's halacha l'moshe misinai. But Rabbosai, it's mamon. That is a mamon case. That is a mammon case. So because that is a mammon case, ultimately, again, so that's an exception. So you do have, just want to point out, you do have a situation where you are not paying what you are damaging, what you have damaged, but it is still mammon. So because of that, there is a case where you paid less than what you damaged, but it's still mammon. So because of that, the Brisa couldn't phrase it as saying anytime you pay more than what you damaged, or anytime you pay less than what you damaged, that's called knas, because that's not true. There is an exception to the rule. And therefore, there is halacha l'moshe misinai that tzroros, chatzin nezek of tzroros, is a case of mamon, mishum hachi lo katani. Therefore, ultimately, it can't be included. But I will say, I do want to point out, interestingly enough, it would appear based on this that halacha l'maisa, that knas, that chatzin nezek is considered to be a knas. Now, I will say that based on this, v'hasha da amrit palga niska knasa. Now we've established that chatzin nezek is a knas. Watch this. Hai kalba da achla imri. If you have a dog which consumed the sheep, a dog which consumed the sheep, the shunra, the achla tanagola, or ultimately again a cat which consumed the chicken, meshunahi, this is considered to be an abnormal case of damages, velo magbinan bebavel. And I will say, and therefore again, it would be half damages, because this would be keren tam, half damages, which is a knas, and because it's a knas, ultimately again, we would not go ahead and collect it in bavel. We wouldn't collect it in bavel, because I will say in bavel, you cannot collect knas. You cannot collect knas. V'hani mili beravravi. Rabbi said, but that's only assuming that what? We're talking about, again, a dog which ate a large sheep. Dog that ate a large sheep, or a cat that ate a large chicken. Because we'll say that's abnormal. Aval bezutri archehu. We'll say, but a dog eating a small sheep, or a cat eating a small chicken, that's normal. V'tafis lomaf kinan minei. So we'll say, if halacha l'maisa. So therefore, Rabbi say, interesting enough. So again, we've established now that chatzin nezek is going to be knas. Chatzin nezek will be knas, right? That's number one. And therefore, again, I will say knas, as we mentioned in the beginning of the daf, can only be collected in a beis din of dayanim who have smicha. Where do they have smicha? In Eretz Yisrael, not in Bava. So in Bava, they cannot adjudicate chatzin nezek cases because they're knas cases. However, even though in Bava they can't adjudicate it, halacha l'maisa, if the damaged party seized property, halacha l'maisa, we wouldn't go ahead and extract it from him. Vi amar kavoli zimna dazdona la'ardi Yisrael. And if the damaged party says, okay, establish for me a time, I want a court date in Eretz Yisrael, we'll give him a court date in Eretz Yisrael, v'ilo, and if he doesn't, right, and if the damaged party, if the damager doesn't go to Eretz Yisrael on the established court date, misham tinale, we go and we excommunicate him. Ubenkach, misham tinale ad mesalik ezekin. Now listen to this, a totally side thing. Halacha l'maisa, if Rabbi say a person has an animal that does damage, right? Rabbi say a person is obligated to go ahead and remove that damage. You are not allowed to maintain a damaging force. So the Gemara says, therefore again, halacha l'maisa, we can't adjudicate chatzin nezek cases in Bavel because it's a knas, and in Bavel we can't adjudicate knas cases. But if the damaged party says, I want a court date in Eretz Yisrael, we give him a court date in Eretz Yisrael, we make the damager go up to Eretz Yisrael. If the damager does go up to Eretz Yisrael, ultimately again he's excommunicated. But in the interim, the damager is obligated to make sure that his animal, it can't do any more damage. Rabbi said, listen to this. Minayin shelo yigadol adam kelev rabisoch beso. It's not my words. I will say. It's just so. I will say. Right? No. You ever hear these things like these? Rahman in these cases, person had a pit bull, and the pit bull mauled someone. Like everyone is shocked, right? How did this happen? It was such a nice pit bull, right? It rolled around with the baby. It was so kind, right? And you're like tippish. You're an idiot. Like, what's the matter with you? Like, and I will say, it's very important, and again, especially for the dog lovers, right? For the dog lovers, again, if you have an animal that is capable of hezek, take care of it. take care of it. Oh, the dog got out. The dog got out. The dog got out. Like that's an excuse, right? If you own it, take care of it. Right? If you own it, the responsibility ultimately is on you. And if you're not responsible, you're derelict. And if you can't take care of it, then get a goldfish. Right? And at the end of the day, if you're not responsible enough to care for an animal and make sure that it doesn't go ahead and adversely impact anyone else, get something that lives in a bowl. And that's it. And that's it. Rabbi Nosson says, you can't go ahead and be magadol kelev ra inside of your house. The Gemara says, V'al yamit sulam ru'ah b'sobeh. So also, don't maintain a rickety ladder. The idea being is, don't maintain something in your house which has the ability to go ahead and do damage to someone else. Talmud Omar, lo sasim davim v'veisecha. Literally, again, don't allow blood to be shed in your home. I will say, bottom line, halacha l'maisa. How do we go out and we paskin? So I will say, we paskin, the Shulchan Aruch paskins the Choshen Mishpat. This is the first halacha in Choshen Mishpat. Siman Aleph, halacha Aleph, chatzi nezek is knas. Half damages we paskin is knas. Going to be different than chatzi nezek of tzroros, but chatzi nezek ultimately, Rabbi say, is considered to be a penalty payment. Halacha l'maisa and not. Mama Rabbi say, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach. I'm sorry, keep your dog in official. Whatever you need to do.